Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. All right, strap in, everyone. Today we are taking a deep dive into something that might just turn your ideas about work upside down. We're talking holacracy.
A whole new way of thinking about management.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking ditching the traditional CEO, the hierarchy.
All of that.
In favor of, well, something called distributed authority.
You could say that.
Now, our guide for this deep dive is this book, Holacracy, the new management system that redefines management. And this book, I mean, it throws down the gauntlet, right? It asks some really thought-provoking questions like, can a company really work, actually thrive without a CEO?
Big questions.
Yeah. How do you even begin to harness the collective intelligence of a team? And does that even work? Is this the future of work, or is this just another, management fad that will come and go?
Well, I think the book makes a really strong case right from the beginning about why traditional hierarchies are just, well, struggling, especially in a world that's as complex and fast-paced as ours is.
It's almost like, what's the analogy? Like trying to steer a speedboat with a rusty old rudder.
Yeah, exactly. Those old top-down systems, those command and control structures, they're just too slow, too rigid. It's like that analogy the author uses, the one about the low-voltage light on the airplane's instrument panel. Ignoring a crucial warning just because the information doesn't get to the right person in time.
Oh, right.
It gets lost in the layers, and that's exactly what happens in a hierarchy. Vital information gets stuck. Decisions get bottlenecked.
And I think a lot of us have been there. You've got this great idea, this insight, and it just gets completely lost in the system, in the corporate maze. So how does holacracy, fix this? How does it even address this?
Well, you could almost think of it as upgrading your organization's operating system, swapping out the old clunky hierarchy for a much more dynamic structure, one that really distributes authority.
So instead of having a single CEO making all the decisions, holacracy is more about a set of rules or a framework.
I'd say it's both. It's kind of like a user manual for a whole new way of working. One of the core components of holacracy is this thing called a constitution.
So it's not just anarchy, there's a structure.
Definitely not anarchy. There's a very specific structure.
Yeah.
The Constitution outlines how authority is given not to individuals, but to roles. That's a crucial difference.
Okay, so it's not about giving certain people power. It's about empowering roles to make those decisions.
Exactly. And remember that story in the book about the pizza delivery guy, the one who gets fired by the CEO?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It really shows how absurd things can get in a traditional hierarchy when roles and accountabilities are so unclear.
So in holacracy, it wouldn't even matter who the person was.
Yeah.
It's their role that matters. Their role would be clearly defined.
Right.
So that eliminates a lot of the drama, right? A lot of that interpersonal stuff that we see in workplaces.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the power struggles, the turf wars, even those personality clashes, they stem from those unclear roles and expectations.
Okay, so let's say you have a business development role that's all about, networking and closing deals. And then you've got a finance role that's laser focused on budgets and ROI. In a traditional setting, that could easily be a recipe for disaster.
Oh, yeah. Headbutting all the time. But in holacracy, those different priorities, they're already built into the system.
It's not personal. It's structural.
It's just each role doing its thing, fulfilling its purpose. It's kind of like having a team of experts, each one with a very specific set of tools and responsibilities.
I'm starting to see how this could really reduce friction, create more clarity. But how do all these roles fit together? Is it just a bunch of independent people running around?
That's where circles come in.
Circles.
Think of them as self-organizing teams, like mini companies within the larger organization.
Okay, so cells forming organs.
Yeah.
And the organs forming the body, right?
You got it. Each one has its own function, but it's all interconnected. It's this concept of holarchy, a structure that's found, all throughout nature, really. Each circle has its own autonomy, its own authority, but it's also nested within a larger circle.
Okay. Creating a web of interconnectedness.
Right.
So it enables both independence and collaboration.
Exactly.
Like a cell being a self-contained whole, but also part of a larger organ.
It's fascinating how holacracy, takes inspiration from these natural systems. But how do these circles make decisions? How does that work?
That's where it gets really interesting. It's a very unique decision-making process, one that really aims to, tap into the intelligence of everyone.
Not just the folks at the top.
Right. And meetings are a big part of this.
I'm curious about that. How are Holacracy meetings different from, the typical soul-sucking ones we're all used to? Well, there are two main types: governance meetings and tactical meetings. Governance meetings are like, it's like they're fine-tuning the organizational code. Like, you're shaping the structure and roles of the company. Tactical meetings are about, the day-to-day, getting the work done.
Okay, so governance is big picture, and
Yeah.
tactical is more about, like, operations.
Exactly. And in governance meetings, that's where you address those tensions the book talks about.
Tensions. I think we need an explanation here. What exactly is a tension?
Well, think of it as the gap between what is and what could be.
Okay.
It's that feeling of this isn't working as well as it could, but, it's framed as an opportunity.
Okay. So you're not just complaining. You're actually identifying areas where the organization could, well, evolve.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say we're at, I don't know, Better Widgets.
Right.
Fictional company using Holacracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say I'm in the widget sales role.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sensing a tension. Maybe our widget prices are too high.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hurting sales. What happens next?
So you would bring that tension to the governance meeting.
Okay, and then what? We all just start arguing about pricing strategies.
Not quite. There's a process for this.
Okay.
You would propose a solution, like a price reduction.
Okay. I propose we slash prices by 50%.
Right.
At least on our basic widget, It's meant to be an entry-level product, but the price is just, well, it's scaring people off.
All right, so the facilitator would then open the floor for, clarifying questions. Not opinions or debates at this point, just questions to make sure everyone understands the proposal.
Got it. So someone could ask, would this affect our bulk discounts?
Hmm.
But if they say 50%, that's crazy talk, the facilitator would step in.
Exactly. The next step is the objection round. This is where anyone can raise concerns about why adopting the proposal might actually hurt the organization. But these objections, they have to be about potential harm, not just, I don't like it.
Okay, so our fictional finance person might object and say, setting prices shouldn't even be done in a governance meeting.
Yeah.
That's overstepping.
That's a valid objection. It highlights a potential problem. And the facilitator would then guide the group to, integrate that objection.
Yeah.
Meaning you revise the proposal
Okay.
to address the tension without, causing harm.
So maybe the solution isn't setting a specific price, but creating a new role that's responsible for setting prices, but within certain parameters that are, defined by the governance process.
You got it. See, it's not just about reacting to problems. It's about actually evolving the structure of the organization.
It's like constantly optimizing based on real-time feedback.
It's a pretty amazing process.
It sounds very deliberate, very thoughtful. But what about the tactical meetings? Those are more about, getting things done, right?
Yeah.
Like the daily grind.
Yes, exactly. Think of them as highly efficient check-ins. They have a specific structure, a format designed to, keep things moving.
So no more of those meandering meetings that could have been an email.
Exactly. It's all about transparency, collaboration, making sure everyone's on the same page.
This is a lot to take in. But I think what I'm getting is that Holacracy is really aiming to create a much more agile workplace.
Oh, yeah.
A much more responsive workplace, a much more, human way of working.
Definitely. And we're just getting started. We still have to dig into strategy challenges and what this all means for individuals, whether you're working within a Holacracy or, even if you're just inspired by it.
Okay, so my brain is buzzing with all these new concepts.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But so we've talked about distributing authority and constantly adapting the organizational structure. But how does strategy even work in all of this?
Yeah.
If there's no single person in charge, how does the company even set a direction?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up all the time. In the book, it really emphasizes that Holacracy doesn't eliminate strategy, but it actually creates a much more, I guess you could say, dynamic approach, more responsive. Think of it like navigating a ship, but in a constantly changing current. You're always having to adjust your course based on, real-time feedback.
So instead of creating a rigid 5-year plan that will probably be obsolete within a year, you're constantly adjusting your sails to the wind.
Exactly. Strategy in a Holacracy, it's about setting a general direction, priorities. But it's always evolving. It's a living, breathing thing.
It has to be. The book talks about this concept of bringing evolution inside. What does that even mean?
Well, it's a pretty radical idea. Instead of trying to predict the future and, plan for every possible scenario, Holacracy really embraces uncertainty and it creates a system that can adapt really quickly. It's about responding to change, not trying to, control it.
It's like the difference between a company that's built like a fortress, trying to withstand every external force, and a company that's more like a flexible, adaptable organism.
I like that. That's a perfect analogy. And a real world example that comes to mind is Zappos.
Oh, yeah.
The book talks about how they really went all in on Holacracy.
That's pretty bold for a company that big.
Yeah.
Did it work?
It wasn't without its, growing pains. But the book actually quotes one of their, I guess you could say, key implementers, who says that the power that managers used to have is now distributed to every single employee.
Wow.
Which is a pretty profound shift.
That's a massive culture change. So, okay, we've talked about strategy. We've seen a real world example. But let's get down to the brass tacks.
Yeah.
How does Holacracy work on a daily basis? What are the mechanics?
You remember those governance meetings we talked about?
Yeah.
That's where the structure of the organization is really defined and refined.
Right. It's like coding the operating system of the company.
Precisely. Yeah. And to do that effectively, you need a really clear process. And the Constitution, it outlines a very specific meeting format.
Okay, so no more of those aimless meetings, the ones where everyone is talking over each other and nothing gets decided.
Exactly. It's like having a script to follow, which really keeps the conversation focused and productive. Each meeting starts with a check-in round just to, allow everyone to kind of get present.
Addressing the human element right from the start.
Right. And then you move into reviewing the agenda, which is basically a list of specific tensions that people have identified.
And these aren't just any problems. These are those gaps between what is and what could be, right? Those opportunities for improvement.
Exactly. And then each tension is processed one at a time using this process called the integrative decision-making process.
Okay, break that down for me. How does IDM, I guess, how does that even work?
So it's a step-by-step process, designed to make sure that every voice is heard and that every proposal is, really thoroughly considered. The person who is sensing the tension presents a proposal, a very concrete change that they believe will, address the issue.
So let's say I'm that widget salesperson again, and I'm sensing this tension around low website traffic. Yeah. I might propose creating a new role, a role that's entirely focused on SEO and content marketing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right.
So then the facilitator, they would open the floor for clarifying questions. Again, no debates or opinions yet, just questions to make sure everyone understands the proposal.
Got it. So someone could ask, would this new role report to marketing? But if someone says, that's a terrible idea, we don't need another role, the facilitator would redirect them.
Exactly. Then you move into the objection round. This is where anyone can raise concerns about why the proposal, might actually hurt the organization. But these objections, again, they have to be about potential harm, not just personal preferences.
So someone could object and say, well, creating a new SEO role would just be duplicating efforts because marketing is already handling that.
That's a valid objection. It highlights a potential, negative consequence. And the facilitator's role is to, test the validity of each objection.
Right.
Is it a real concern or is it just a personal opinion?
It's about keeping the discussion, focused on the good of the whole, not just individual preferences.
Exactly. And if the objection is valid, the group then moves into the integration step.
So you're not just, tossing out the proposal.
No.
You're trying to, refine it.
Exactly. You work together to modify the proposal in a way that, addresses the objection, but without, losing sight of the original tension.
It's like shaping clay.
Yeah.
You're molding the idea until it takes a form that, works for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that's the real beauty of IDM. It really integrates these diverse perspectives. And you end up with solutions that are often, better than the initial proposal.
So you're not looking for everyone to agree 100%, but rather a solution that truly serves the organization. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what happens after a decision is made in a governance meeting? How does it actually get implemented?
That's where those tactical meetings come in.
Oh.
Remember, they're the more operational day-to-day check-ins. Think of it like, a Formula One pit stop.
Okay.
You quickly assess the situation, make some adjustments, and then get back on track.
So these are the meetings where you actually get things done.
Yeah.
But how are they different from those governance meetings?
Well, again, the Constitution outlines a very specific format for tactical meetings.
Okay.
It's designed to be, very efficient, very action-oriented. You start by reviewing a checklist of, any recurring actions, just making sure nothing falls through the cracks.
So it's like a built-in accountability system, making sure everyone is on top of their responsibilities?
Exactly. And then you move into reviewing key metrics to track progress and just kind of get a snapshot of, well, how things are going.
So staying data informed, making sure you're actually moving towards your goals.
Right.
I was like that.
Next, you have progress updates where everyone, checks in on their active projects, any roadblocks, any updates to share.
It's a quick, efficient way to keep everyone in the loop.
Exactly. And then comes the really exciting part, agenda building. This is where you capture any new tensions that have emerged, since the last tactical meeting.
So maybe a project has hit a snag.
Right.
Or a new opportunity has popped up.
Yeah.
And it requires attention.
Exactly. You capture each tension very briefly without, getting into those deep discussions at this point.
Okay.
And finally, you move into, what's called triaging issues.
And that's where you actually roll up your sleeves and work through those new tensions.
Exactly. Finding some actionable solutions using that, what do you need approach.
Okay, so the focus is on moving forward, not dwelling on the problems. I like how this whole system just keeps things flowing. But what about deadlines? I mean, in a traditional setting, deadlines are everything.
Yeah.
How does Holacracy even handle that?
Well, the book actually, it kind of challenges this obsession with deadlines.
Really?
They call them buy-wins, and they argue that they often create more problems than they solve.
But how do you hold people accountable without deadlines?
Well, when you set a deadline, you're essentially, asking someone to predict the future, which is, impossible.
Yeah, I guess that's true. We all know projects rarely go exactly according to plan.
Exactly. And when those predictions, inevitably turn out to be wrong, you end up with those missed deadlines, those disappointed stakeholders. A lot of unnecessary stress.
So if you're not using deadlines, what's the alternative? How do you even make sure that things actually get done?
Well, Holacracy, it emphasizes transparency and prioritization. It's about, being very clear about what you're working on, how you're prioritizing your tasks, and what some realistic expectations are.
So it's more about open communication and trust.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to force things to fit into an artificial timeline.
Right. And if someone needs an update on a project, they can always, ask for a projection. But it's not a commitment.
Okay, so it's a much more fluid approach,
Yeah.
much more adaptable. It kind of acknowledges the inherent uncertainty of work. But does this lack of deadlines ever lead to, chaos or a lack of accountability?
It's a common concern, but the book argues that the structure and the clarity of Holacracy actually lead to greater efficiency and productivity.
I mean, how?
Well, for one thing, you eliminate a lot of the wasted time and energy that's often spent, navigating those traditional hierarchies. No more endless email chains, pointless meetings, or waiting for approval from someone 5 levels up.
That sounds amazing.
And because everyone has those very clear roles and accountabilities, there's less confusion about who's responsible for what. So you avoid those situations where, tasks just fall through the cracks.
Because everyone assumes it's someone else's job. It's like everyone knows their place on the field. So you don't have, players tripping over each other trying to get to the ball.
Exactly. And the tactical meeting process, with its focus on action and accountability, it really ensures that things actually get done. The book even quotes someone who implemented Holacracy who said, "Our team got through a huge amount of work in just 90 minutes. #Holacracy wins."
Okay, that's impressive.
Right.
But it's not just about speed, right? I mean, it has to be about the quality of the work, too.
Of course. And when you have a system that really empowers people to, use their best judgment and take ownership of their roles, you tend to get, better outcomes. It's like the difference between a team of robots that are mindlessly following instructions and a team of, skilled craftspeople who are, passionate about their work.
Right. And I imagine having those clearly defined roles also helps prevent information from getting, stuck in silos.
You're exactly right. In traditional hierarchies, knowledge often flows vertically, but not horizontally. But with Holacracy's structure of nested circles and cross-functional roles, information is much more likely to flow freely throughout the entire organization.
It's like creating like a network of interconnected neurons,
Yeah.
where insights and ideas can just travel quickly and easily. This sounds incredible in theory, but does it always work so smoothly in practice?
Well, like any system, Holacracy has its challenges. And transitioning to this new way of working, it isn't always a walk in the park.
Yeah, I can imagine there's a learning curve.
Definitely. One of the biggest hurdles is overcoming resistance to change. Humans are creatures of habit, and some people, well, they just aren't comfortable letting go of the old ways of doing things.
Yeah, I get that. Change can be scary, especially in a work environment where people are used to, a certain amount of predictability and control.
Exactly. And the book outlines 3 common scenarios where, well, where this resistance can really derail a Holacracy implementation.
Okay.
The first is what they call the reluctant to let go leader.
So this is the CEO who says they're all in on Holacracy,
Yeah.
but they can't quite bring themselves to, like, fully relinquish control.
Exactly. They might formally, adopt the Constitution, but then they keep trying to exert their authority in, well, subtle ways.
It's like saying you're going vegan, but then sneaking a bite of bacon when no one's looking.
Exactly. And it creates a lot of confusion and frustration because it undermines the whole, well, the fundamental principles of the system.
It's like trying to play a game, but the other person keeps changing the rules. So how do you even overcome that type of resistance?
Well, the book says it can be really difficult because it often stems from, a very deep-seated need for control. It's not just about logic or reason. It's about, confronting a fundamental part of someone's, well, personality.
That's a tough one. What about the second scenario?
The second is what they call the uncooperative middle.
So these are the middle managers who feel like threatened by the whole power shift and just actively resist the transition.
Exactly. They might, sabotage meetings, spread negativity, or they might just refuse to follow the new processes.
Right. It's like a group of kids who don't want to play a new game because they're afraid of losing.
Yeah.
And middle managers, they often have a lot of influence.
A lot of influence.
So their buy-in is crucial.
It really is. And the book suggests that addressing this resistance, well, it requires a combination of really clear communication, strong leadership, and even, potentially some tough decisions.
About personnel.
Yeah.
Because if someone is just like truly unwilling to embrace this new system, they might not be the right fit for the organization anymore.
Exactly. It's not about punishing people, but about, creating a culture where everyone is, well, aligned with the operating system.
Okay, I get it. What's the third scenario?
The third scenario is what they call the stopping short syndrome.
Okay, that's interesting. What is that?
This is when a company implements, the basic structure of Holacracy, but they don't fully integrate it
Okay.
into their systems and their processes.
So they might have the roles, the circles, the meetings, but they're still clinging to those old ways of doing things.
Right. And those old ways just don't mesh with the Holacracy philosophy.
It's like putting a shiny new, sports car engine into a beat-up old minivan. You might get a little bit of a boost in performance, but you're not really maximizing the potential of that engine.
That's a great analogy. It's about committing to the full transformation, not just, dipping your toes in the water.
Right. Holacracy is a system. It's not just a set of tools.
Right.
And you really need to embrace the whole thing, the underlying principles, if you actually want to, reap the benefits.
Right.
Now, you mentioned that the book has like these real-world stories about these challenges. Are there any that come to mind?
Well, there's this one about a CEO who was initially, really gung-ho about Holacracy, but then started struggling with, letting go of control. He kept trying to, insert himself into decisions that they weren't in his domain of authority anymore.
So it's like he was trying to play Superman, swooping in to save the day, even though the system is really designed to empower others to solve problems on their own.
Exactly. And it took a lot of, coaching and self-awareness for him to really, let go and actually trust the process.
So even for those leaders who genuinely believe in Holacracy, like letting go of that traditional idea of control, that can be really, really hard.
It can be. And the book also talks about this company where the middle management layer, they were really resistant to the change.
Oh, yeah.
They felt like they were losing power and status, and they were actively trying to undermine the whole implementation. It created a really toxic environment. And the CEO, he had to make some tough decisions.
It's about personnel.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that Holacracy, like any major change, any kind of organizational change, requires strong leadership and a willingness to, make tough calls.
It does. And sometimes it means recognizing that some people, even good people, just might not be the right fit, for a holacracy-driven culture.
It's about finding individuals who are, like, comfortable with autonomy,
Right.
accountability,
Right.
distributed authority.
Yeah, exactly. What about that third scenario, the stopping short one? Any real-world examples of that?
Yeah. Does the book give an example of that?
Yes. They talk about this company that implemented the basic structure of holacracy, but then they kept their old performance review process.
Okay.
And that process was very, manager-centric.
Right.
It didn't align with the principles of self-organization.
So they were trying to mix oil and water. No wonder it caused problems.
Exactly. It was sending mixed messages to their employees. And the book uses the analogy of, telling someone they can drive anywhere they want, but then putting a speed limit on their car.
That's a good analogy. It seems like one of the biggest challenges with holacracy is that it requires such a fundamental shift in mindset.
It does. It's not just about changing the structure. It's about changing the culture.
Okay, so we've looked at the potential pitfalls. But even with all these challenges, it seems like there's still a lot of potential upside. Like, what are some of the main benefits that organizations have seen?
Well, one of the most commonly reported benefits is, increased agility and responsiveness. Because those decisions are made closer to, the actual work being done, the organizations can adapt much more quickly to, changes in the market.
It's like having a nimble speedboat instead of a giant cargo ship.
Exactly. And that increased agility, it can be a huge competitive advantage these days.
What about employee engagement and motivation? I mean, has holacracy had any kind of impact on that?
Yeah, have you seen an impact in those areas?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Many organizations have reported seeing, a really significant boost.
I can imagine. If you're giving people more autonomy and, more ownership over their work, it makes sense they'd be more invested. Absolutely. And it's not just about autonomy. Holacracy also provides this really clear framework. For purpose and meaning, each role has a very defined purpose, and it's all connected to the overall goals of the company.
So people can see how their individual contributions fit into the larger picture.
Right.
Which can be incredibly motivating.
It can. And another key benefit is, increased innovation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
When you empower people to experiment, to take risks,
yeah,
they're more likely to come up with those creative solutions, right?
Exactly. Holacracy really encourages a culture of experimentation and continuous improvement. It's all about constantly looking for ways to do things, better, faster, and more efficiently.
It sounds like it creates a really dynamic and engaging work environment.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides? Are there criticisms? I mean, we need to look at both sides of the coin here, right?
Of course. One common criticism is that holacracy can be, too complex.
Yeah.
Too bureaucratic. All those rules and processes and meetings, they can feel kind of overwhelming.
Yeah. Especially for, organizations that are used to a more, informal way of working.
Right, exactly. And then there's always the risk that all that structure could actually stifle creativity and innovation.
Yeah. Sometimes the best ideas come from, just spontaneous collaboration, thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And that might be harder to achieve, within a really structured framework.
It might. It's kind of like trying to force a river to, flow in a straight line.
That's a good one. Another criticism I've heard is that holacracy can lead to a lack of accountability. If there's no one in charge who's ultimately responsible when things go wrong.
That's a fair point. But the book actually argues that holacracy creates a different kind of accountability. It's more distributed.
Right.
And it's more transparent. Instead of having that one person at the top who's, responsible for absolutely everything, you have a system where everyone is accountable for their very specific roles and domains.
So you're not just passing the buck, but you're creating this web of responsibility where everyone is contributing to the success or, the failure of the organization.
Exactly. And ideally, this leads to a greater sense of ownership and responsibility. And if something does go wrong, it's easier to, pinpoint the root cause and address it because you have that very clear structure of roles and accountabilities. It's like having a trail of breadcrumbs that lead you right back to the source of the problem.
So instead of having this blame culture, you're actually fostering a learning culture where mistakes are seen as opportunities to improve.
Exactly. And another potential downside is that holacracy can be really tough to implement, especially in those organizations that have, a very strong hierarchical culture.
Yeah.
If people are just used to, deferring to authority and just following orders, it can be a real challenge to shift to a system that really emphasizes autonomy and self-organization. It's like trying to teach an old dog new tricks.
So it sounds like to really implement holacracy successfully, you need a pretty significant cultural shift.
You do. It's not just about changing the structures, it's about, changing those mindsets.
Okay, so we've looked at some of the potential benefits, we've looked at some of the potential drawbacks.
Yeah.
But even if someone decides, you know what, this whole holacracy thing, it's not for me, are there still valuable takeaways, like things they can apply to their own work?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you're working within, a traditional hierarchy, there are a lot of principles and practices from holacracy that can be incredibly beneficial.
It's almost like, holacracy can be this really rich source of inspiration.
It can be.
Even if, a company doesn't adopt the whole system,
Yeah,
there's still so much to learn from it.
absolutely.
Like one of the things that really stuck with me was this whole idea of, clarifying roles and accountability.
It's so basic, but
It is.
so important.
But you'd be surprised how many teams just like completely mess this up.
They really do.
And then you end up with all this like wasted effort. People stepping on each other's toes, things falling through the cracks, just so much frustration.
It's a recipe for disaster.
But as we've seen with holacracy, like when you're just crystal clear about who's responsible for what, it makes a world of difference.
The book really hammers this home. It's not just about, writing those super detailed job descriptions. It's about really understanding how those responsibilities connect to the bigger picture.
Right, the purpose of the organization.
Right. And having a system in place that allows those roles to, adapt and evolve as the company grows and changes.
Because let's face it, things change quickly.
They do.
And roles have to be able to, keep up.
They do.
Sticking to those like super rigid job descriptions, I mean, that can really hold a company back.
It can. And the beauty of it is, even if you're in, a more traditional hierarchy, you can still push for more clarity, within your own team around those roles and those accountabilities. It might not be a complete, holacracy overhaul, but it can make things run so much smoother.
It really can. Another thing that really resonated with me was that what do you need approach
Yeah.
to problem solving,
Yeah, it's so powerful.
It just cuts through all the BS.
It does.
It gets right to the heart of the matter.
It shifts the focus away from blame, away from opinions.
Right. Instead of getting caught up in, the blame game or arguing about like what's the right way to do something, you just ask, okay, what do we need to do to move forward?
Exactly. And that question, it can be applied to, pretty much any situation.
It can.
Whether it's a technical issue, a communication breakdown, even a strategic decision. It helps everyone just stay laser focused on the goal.
It's so refreshing.
It is.
Because it like eliminates all that unproductive back and forth, those tangents that just like derail conversations. And what I really love about it is that it like empowers the person who's actually raising the issue.
It does.
You're basically saying, I trust you, you know what you need, and I'm here to support you.
It's incredibly collaborative.
It is.
And respectful. It just creates this foundation of trust within a team.
So we've talked about clarifying roles, that what do you need approach. Now this next holacracy concept, it's a bit of a mindset shift.
It is.
And that's reframing problems as tensions.
Because the word problem, it's so loaded.
Right.
It immediately makes people feel like defensive.
It feels negative.
Yeah.
Like something to avoid.
Exactly.
Whereas a tension, it's just, it's just a gap between what is and what could be.
Yeah.
And it feels more like an invitation to like get curious.
Yeah.
Explore different possibilities. Find creative solutions.
Instead of, shrinking back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a complete like 180 in terms of mindset. It's moving from a place of fear and avoidance to a place of like opportunity, growth. It's like seeing a roadblock, not as the end of the road, but like a chance to discover a new path.
A better path.
A better path. And I think that shift in perspective, it can make such a huge difference in how we approach challenges.
Yeah.
Individually and collectively. Instead of getting stuck in that negativity, we can start to see those obstacles as like stepping stones.
Oh, exactly.
Speaking of approaching things differently, We can't forget about meetings.
Oh, meetings. We've all been in those meetings that just feel like a total waste of time.
Soul-sucking. But Holacracy, it has a completely different approach.
It does.
It's about, having a clear purpose for that meeting, a very defined process,
Right.
and a facilitator who's there to, keep things on track.
Make sure things run smoothly.
So even if you're not using, the whole Holacracy meeting format,
Yeah.
you can still borrow some of those elements to make your own meetings, more productive, more engaged.
Absolutely. Just adding a check-in round at the beginning can really help people get present. And then having that structured agenda.
It ensures that you're actually talking about the things that matter.
Exactly.
Not just going off on those random tangents.
And a designated facilitator can really make sure that, everyone has a voice.
It creates a space where people feel heard, respected, empowered.
It's about turning meetings into, something that's actually enjoyable.
Yes, productive and enjoyable. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Holacracy, we really want to encourage you to, take some of these ideas and experiment.
Yeah.
Try them out in your own work, in your own life.
Yeah. Even if you never implement Holacracy as a full system, you can still learn so much from it, from this new approach to, how work can be done.
It's about challenging those assumptions. It's about embracing change and finding those new ways to unlock potential in yourself and the people around you.
The future of work is not about, clinging to those old models. It's not about trying to control everything.
It's about creating those adaptable systems.
Right.
Human-centered.
Yeah.
Purpose-driven.
And who knows, maybe Holacracy is just the beginning of a much bigger shift in how we think about work and how we organize ourselves.
That's a great point. Well, that's it for our deep dive into Holacracy. We hope you found it, informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even, inspiring.
We did too. And remember, the future of work, it's really in all of our hands. So let's keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep creating those workplaces that are, more human, more fulfilling, and more aligned with, with what truly matters.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.